Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? A simple nursery rhyme many of us sang during childhood seems innocent enough on the surface, just pleasant verses about flowers and gardens. But beneath this cheerful facade lies something more sinister. This seemingly harmless little ditty may actually contain a coded message about one of history's most brutal monarchs, a woman who burned hundreds of people alive and earned the notorious nickname Bloody Mary. This isn't just folklore. This is about Queen Mary I of England, whose garden wasn't filled with flowers, but with the remains of Protestant heretics, those silver bells and cockleshells, medieval torture devices designed to inflict maximum agony, and those pretty maids all in a row. They weren't flowers at all. They were guillotines, lined up and ready for mass execution. For centuries, children have unknowingly recited the lyrics to what might be the most disturbing nursery rhyme ever written, a coded confession of religious persecution, systematic murder, and royal terror that claimed over 300 lives. Hidden in plain sight, disguised as child's play, lies one of the darkest chapters in English history. Let's collect our shovels and dig up the blood-soaked truth behind Mary, Mary, quite contrary. And trust me, you'll never hear this nursery rhyme the same way again. Behind the innocent melody of children's playground chants lies a world most parents would never suspect. Nursery rhymes weren't born in cozy bedrooms or sunny playgrounds. They emerged from the shadows of political upheaval, religious persecution, and royal scandal. When most people couldn't read or write, these seemingly harmless verses became underground newspapers, spreading dangerous gossip and forbidden truths through coded language that could slip past the ears of those in power. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, appears to be nothing more than a gentle garden song. But peel back the layers and you'll discover something far more sinister lurking beneath its sing-song rhythm. The Mary in question, most likely Mary Queen of Scots, whose reign from 1542 to 1567 was anything but a fairy tale. Picture this, a Catholic queen ruling over a fiercely Protestant Scotland, her every move watched, judged, and whispered about in shadowy corners. The innocent question, how does your garden grow, takes on a chilling new meaning when you realize it's not about flowers at all. It's a mockery of her attempts to cultivate Catholic influence in hostile Protestant soil. Those silver bells, cockles, shells, pretty maids, all in a row pretty maids. They conclude with something far more vicious. Sing cuckolds all a row. The word cuckold was a devastating insult, suggesting a man whose wife had betrayed him, bearing children that weren't his own. This wasn't just playground teasing. This was character assassination, disguised as children's entertainment, spreading rumors about Mary's alleged affairs and questioning the legitimacy of her heirs through a melody that would echo through centuries. In the glittering palaces of France, Mary Queen of Scots seemed destined for a storybook ending when she wed Francis II, but death had been watching, waiting. Just 2 years later, Francis was gone, leaving Mary a widow at 18, her fairy tale shattered before it truly began. Returning to the brutal politics of Scotland, Mary's heart would betray her once again. Enter Lord Darnley, Henry Stuart, a man whose charm masked a hunger for power that would consume everything in its path. Their marriage, it wasn't just a union, it was a collision of two forces that would tear the Scottish court apart. What started as passionate love quickly revealed its true nature, a battle for control. Mary was willing to share her throne, but Darnley wanted something far more sinister, her complete submission. He expected her to bow, to surrender her birthright, to become nothing more than his shadow. Within months, their marriage had become a prison, where love curdled into something toxic and dangerous. Darnley's true character emerged like a disease. He drowned himself in alcohol and flesh, his wandering heart finding solace in the arms of both women and men, including a captivating young secretary named David Rizzio. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Rizzio's loyalty shifted from Darnley's bed to Mary's heart. Whispers crept through the castle corridors like poison. The Queen and her secretary locked in secret meetings that lasted far too long. And when Mary's belly began to swell with the future heir to Scotland's throne, those whispers became accusations. Was the child truly Darnley's, or did it belong to the man who had stolen both his lover and his wife? Jealousy is a monster that devours reason, and Lord Darnley was about to prove just how far a desperate man will go when his pride is shattered. Together with his father, Darnley hatched a scheme to rid himself of Rizzio once and for all. This wasn't just about jealousy. It was a calculated move meant to manipulate Mary into surrendering her crown. The plan, as treacherous as it was simple, eliminate the Queen's closest advisor and leave her isolated, vulnerable, and desperate enough to hand over power. On the night of March 9th, 1566, darkness descended on the palace of Holyrood House like a funeral shroud. The air itself seemed to thicken with malice as Lord Darnley's conspirators, around 80 men, hungry for blood and power, crept through the palace corridors. Leading this army of shadows was Lord Ruthven, a man whose very presence seemed to drain warmth from the room. Their destination? The Queen's private supper chamber, where Mary sat peacefully with friends, completely unaware that death was walking toward her door. Rizzio was there too, laughing, sharing stories, living his final moments without knowing it. When those grand doors creaked open, Lord Ruthven stepped forward like death personified, his armor catching the candlelight in sinister flashes. His voice cut through the evening's warmth as he accused Rizzio of dishonoring the Queen. It was theatre, really, a performance designed to give their murder the thinnest veneer of justification. Mary, ever the diplomat, tried desperately to defuse the situation. She begged Ruthven to leave, insisting that any grievance against Rizzio should be handled properly by Parliament, but her words fell on deaf ears. Ruthven's hand moved to his dagger, and the room's atmosphere shifted from tense to deadly. What happened next was chaos incarnate. Mary rose in fury, her royal authority clashing against the encroaching darkness. Behind her, Rizzio cowered, a man caught in a web of politics he never fully understood. Mary's friends lunged forward, trying to protect their queen, grappling with armed conspirators in a desperate struggle, but they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and ultimately powerless. In the violent confusion, Rizzio was dragged kicking and screaming into the adjoining chamber. Mary could only watch in horror as cold steel pressed against her own body, a pistol, a reminder that she, too, was just one decision away from death. In that next room, something monstrous unfolded. Rizzio, trapped and terrified, faced his executioners. What followed wasn't just murder, it was butchery. 56 times the blades found their mark, 56 wounds carved into a man whose only crime was being too close to power. The scene played out like a nightmare symphony, each strike adding another note to this composition of pure evil. The final blow, it came from Lord Darnley's own dagger, wielded by one of his assassins. When it was over, they stripped Rizzio's lifeless body of his fine clothes and hurled it down the palace stairs like garbage. It was a message, written in blood and contempt. This is what happens to those who dare rise above their station. But this chilling drama was far from over. Just 1 year later, Lord Darnley would meet his end in circumstances so suspicious, so perfectly orchestrated, that historians still debate the truth buried beneath centuries of royal cover-ups. Picture this: February 10th, 1567, the dead of night in Edinburgh, where ancient cobblestones hold secrets like graves hold bones. Lord Darnley lay recovering from illness in Kirkhofield, an old provost's house tucked away in the shadows of the Royal Mile. What he didn't know was that his sanctuary was slowly being transformed into his tomb. At exactly 2 a.m., the silence exploded, a blast so violent it shook the very foundations of Edinburgh, ripped through Kirkhofield, turning stone walls into dust and timber into splinters. When the smoke cleared and the debris settled, searchers found Lord Darnley's body in a nearby garden, sprawled beside his faithful groom. But here's where the story takes a sinister turn. Neither body showed any signs of burns or blast injuries. Instead, Darnley bore the unmistakable marks of strangulation around his throat. A chair and rope lay scattered nearby, as if they'd been used in a desperate escape attempt that went terribly wrong. Think about it. What kind of explosion kills without burning? What kind of accident requires strangulation? The evidence suggests Darnley was awakened by something or someone and tried to flee with his servant, but they never made it to safety. The explosion that followed wasn't the cause of death, it was the cover-up. Queen Mary mourned publicly for 40 days, playing the grieving widow to perfection. But behind closed doors, whispers spread through Edinburgh's taverns like poison. Was her grief genuine, or was she mourning a husband she'd helped murder? In the twisted web of suspicion that followed, one name emerged from the shadows like a spectre of guilt: the Earl of Bothwell. This man of power and darkness didn't just hover around the edges of the conspiracy. Evidence suggested he was at its very heart. Whispers claimed he had provided the gunpowder that tore through Kirk Field that February night. Even more damning, a pair of shoes belonging to one of his known supporters was discovered among the rubble and ash. Within days, the streets of Edinburgh became a gallery of accusation. Vibrant placards appeared on walls, while anonymous leaflets flooded through the city like poison in the bloodstream. These weren't mere gossip sheets, they were weapons, boldly naming Mary Queen of Scots and James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell, as lovers and co-conspirators in Lord Darnley's brutal murder. But Bothwell wasn't finished. On April the 24th, 1567, the hunter became the protector, or so he claimed. On a desolate stretch of road between Linlithgow Palace and Edinburgh, Bothwell intercepted Mary, with 800 armed men at his back. His words dripped with false concern as he whispered warnings of fresh dangers lurking in the capital. The nobles were turning against her, he claimed. Assassins waited in every shadow. Only he could keep her safe, but she would need to come with him to Dunbar Castle. Mary stepped willingly into what would become her cage, inside those stone walls. As midnight swallowed the last traces of daylight, Bothwell revealed his true intentions. What happened in those dark hours remains shrouded in controversy, but allegations of force, coercion, and a calculated assault on the Queen's person would haunt the historical record forever. The aftermath played out like a choreographed nightmare. Before the ink had dried on his divorce papers from Jean Gordon, Bothwell claimed Mary as his prize. Their marriage ceremony took place on May 15th, 1567. Exactly 3 months after Darnley's violent death. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was a masterpiece of manipulation that would seal both their fates. The web of Mary's story grows more twisted with each thread we pull. Historians remain divided, unable to agree on the truth that lies buried beneath centuries of political spin and royal propaganda. Was Mary truly a victim? A young woman trapped by the brutal realities of 16th century politics, forced into marriage with a man who may have murdered her husband? Or does the evidence point to something far more chilling? Perhaps Mary wasn't the helpless pawn history often portrays. Perhaps she was a calculating player in a deadly game, willing to sacrifice her second husband's life for the promise of power through marriage to Bothwell. The fragments of history that survive paint conflicting pictures, leaving us to piece together a puzzle where some pieces may have been deliberately destroyed or altered. What we do know is this: Mary's scandals didn't just shock the royal court, they ignited a media frenzy that spread across Europe like wildfire. Common people gossiped about their queen's affairs in taverns and marketplaces. Political enemies used her romantic entanglements as weapons against her reign. This is where our innocent nursery rhyme takes on a darker meaning. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, wasn't just a silly children's song. It was potentially born from one of history's most explosive royal scandals: the murder of Rizzio, the mysterious death of Lord Darnley, Mary's rapid descent into Bothwell's arms. These weren't just historical events. They were the raw material for a rhyme that would outlive the very kingdom that spawned it. Even now, centuries later, Mary's story refuses to rest quietly in the history books. It continues to whisper its secrets, reminding us that behind every crown lies a human being capable of both tremendous love and terrible betrayal. But there's another Mary, lurking in the shadows of history, one whose story is far more chilling. Mary Tudor, better known by her blood-soaked nickname Bloody Mary, presents a much darker possibility for our innocent nursery rhyme. Picture this: the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, a woman whose entire existence became consumed by betrayal, religious obsession, and an unquenchable thirst for power. Mary's mission wasn't just political, it was personal. She wanted to tear down everything her father had built, to resurrect the Catholic faith that had been buried beneath the Protestant Reformation. This wasn't just about religion. This was about reclaiming her mother's destroyed legacy, no matter the cost. The word contrary takes on a sinister meaning when applied to Mary's reign. Here was a queen who promised salvation while orchestrating terror, who spoke of God's love while lighting the fires that would consume her enemies. The question, how does your garden grow, becomes something far more disturbing when you realize what Mary was truly cultivating. At 38, Mary married Philip II of Spain with desperate urgency. She needed an heir, not just wanted one, needed one. The future of her Catholic restoration depended on it. As months passed, whispers began spreading through the palace corridors. Private letters described Mary's growing belly, the movements she claimed to feel. In May of 1555, London erupted in celebration when rumours spread that the Queen had finally given birth. Bonfires blazed through the night as people danced in the streets, but the celebration was built on a lie. Days later, the horrifying truth emerged. There was no baby. There had never been a baby. Yet Mary refused to accept reality. In her twisted mind, she declared that God was withholding her child until every last Protestant heretic had been punished. The executions began again, more brutal than before. But no matter how many bodies she fed to the flames, the promised heir never came. Another interpretation plunges us into even darker waters. What if Mary's garden wasn't a place of growth, but of death? What if each execution she ordered became fertilizer for a graveyard, feeding the earth with blood and bone? The whispers from history's shadows suggest the rest of the rhyme holds keys to her reign of terror. Those innocent silver bells could be thumbscrews, devices that crushed fingers until victims screamed like ringing bells. The cockleshells might represent instruments of torture, tools so horrific that even today, historians hesitate to describe them in detail. And those pretty maids all in a row. Picture a line of victims waiting their turn to meet the maiden. An iron torture device that embraced its victims with deadly spikes. It's a spine-chilling image, each cheerful line of the nursery rhyme peeling back to reveal another layer of systematic cruelty hidden in history's shadows. But here's where the theory stumbles. Mary's preferred method of execution was fire, not elaborate torture devices. She burned Protestants at the stake, watching the flames consume her enemies while she stood in the smoke-filled air. The evidence for these specific torture instruments, it simply doesn't exist in the historical record. Yet Mary Tudor remains a figure carved from contradictions, a woman who wielded power like a blade, navigating a world where ambition and cruelty dance together in the shadows. The rhyme's hidden meanings mirror the complexity of her legacy, a queen of paradoxes, a ruler who governed from darkness, forever etched into history as a name that still sends chills down our spines. The truth behind Mary, Mary quite contrary, may forever remain buried beneath layers of history and speculation. Perhaps it was written about Bloody Mary's reign of terror, with her garden of gallows and growing graveyards. Maybe it captured Mary, Queen of Scots' tragic defiance against a world determined to destroy her. Or it could simply be an innocent children's rhyme that we've twisted into something darker through our own need to find meaning in the shadows. What makes this mystery so compelling isn't finding the definitive answer. It's recognizing how easily innocent words can carry the weight of history's darkest moments, how a simple nursery rhyme can become a vessel for our collective memory of persecution, rebellion, and loss. Thank you for joining me on this journey through another buried tale. If you've made it this far and enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps spread the word about the channel, and subscribe to be part of our growing community of buried tales. Which theory resonates most with you? Bloody Mary's garden of execution, or Mary Queen of Scots' tragic defiance? And what other childhood rhymes do you suspect might be hiding darker truths beneath their innocent melodies? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until we meet again in the shadows of history, keep questioning the stories you thought you knew, because the most innocent tales often carry the heaviest secrets, and the darkest truths are always buried